The night clung to the town like a closed fist, silent and cold, broken only by the dying flicker of a few crooked Christmas lights hanging over the main street, when suddenly a barefoot boy appeared under the falling snow, trembling, staring at a group of bikers parked in front of the bar, and with a voice so fragile it seemed ready to shatter in the freezing air, he asked, "Is Santa real?" And what happened after that, what those men did on that moonless night, would become one of those impossible tales the town would repeat for generations, never knowing if it had been a miracle or the purest act of humanity they had ever witnessed. Stay till the end, because this story proves that even in the deepest darkness, kindness can roar louder than fear. The boy's name was Mateo Calderone, a child barely 9 years old who had learned far too soon that winter has a cruel way of reminding you what you lack when there is no lit fireplace, no wrapped gifts, no adult voice tucking you in when the night falls over the rooftops like a damp, suffocating weight. He lived with his mother in a half-collapsed house, one of those crooked structures that creak when the wind blows, as if complaining about still standing, resisting more out of habit than strength. There, between walls that let the cold seep through and a roof that threatened to give in, Mateo spent his afternoons collecting cans, cleaning shop windows, or shoveling snow off other people's steps, trying to scrape together a few coins to pay for dinner that night or the next. Life had hardened him, but not enough to shield him from the winter. That December night, as the storm began to rage and the icy air bit into his fingers like invisible teeth, the snow slipped through the holes in his torn coat, piercing his skin like tiny shards of glass. Still, he kept walking down the main street, trying to remember the last time he had seen Christmas lights on in his own home, and failing to do so. And it was then, just when the snowfall seemed ready to swallow the entire town, that he saw the bikers arrive. First, he heard the deep, almost animal echo of engines roaring from the edge of town. Then he saw them. Huge men, living shadows cut out against the blizzard, covered in tattoos and leather hardened by thousands of kilometers of road. The headlights of their Harleys sliced through the darkness like blades of light, illuminating the ice, the facades, the pavement, as if they had brought with them not just the bikes, but the road itself. The whole town seemed to shrink at their presence. Windows shut, lights flickered, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. But Mateo did not feel fear. He felt something else, a pull in his chest, an absurd, irrational force pushing him toward them without any explanation. Maybe because he had never seen anyone so strong. Maybe because he had always wanted to believe that somewhere out there were people capable of doing the impossible. Or maybe because he had spent years wondering something that no one had ever truly cared to answer. The boy looked at those giants of the asphalt, swallowed his fear like someone forcing down a hard knot, and with that trembling mix of courage and need, he stepped closer, one step at a time. The freezing air stole the sound from his throat, but he clenched his teeth, filled his lungs with whatever bravery he could gather, and when he was finally close enough for the men to hear him over the roar of the engines, he asked the question that would set everything in motion. Is Santa real? The bikers went completely still, as if the icy wind sweeping the street had frozen not only the snow on the ground, but also their own thoughts. The boy's question hung in the air, vibrating between the white smoke of their breathing, like a secret too fragile to break and too painful to ignore. It wasn't what you expect to hear after riding 500 kilometers through a storm that felt like it wanted to rip the skin from your bones. It wasn't what you hear when you climb off the bike, tired, soaked, with your joints cracking. It was something much deeper, something that cut through each one of them like a silent bullet. Rocco, the oldest of the group, the one whose vest carried patches that spoke of fallen friends, endless roads, and nights no human should have to remember, lowered his gaze to the boy. His gray beard was wet with snow, and his dark, weary eyes reflected a mix of surprise, compassion, and an ancient sadness he had never learned to put into words. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to see him better, to try and figure out what in hell could drive a child to stand before a group of road giants with a question so enormous, so disarmed, so naked. Because Mateo wasn't asking about Santa, not really. He was asking if the world still held a corner of light for him, if there was any truth that wasn't bitter, if there was something he could believe in without life ripping it out of his hands with claws and teeth. And the bikers understood. They felt it like a stab in the chest, like an unexpected echo of their own broken childhoods, of Christmases that never came, of homes that never opened their doors again. Behind the boy, in the trembling glow of the headlights, they could make out the silhouette of the house he lived in. A cold shell, a dark window, a roof on the verge of surrendering. They also saw the absence of a father, the silent struggle of an exhausted mother, the weight of poverty pressing on shoulders far too small to bear it. The wind blew hard, dragging snowflakes like glittering needles that hammered against their leather jackets. And in that instant, something shifted inside those men. It wasn't cheap pity, nor condescension, nor shallow sorrow. It was something deeper, an ancient, almost animal instinct that only wakes up when the road decides to examine you, when it throws an unexpected mirror in front of you and asks what kind of man you really are. And while the engine still crackled from the cold, while the entire town held its breath behind fogged-up windows, the bikers understood that they hadn't arrived there by chance that night. It wasn't just another stop. It wasn't a detour. It was a crossroads that was going to put their souls to the test. And each one of them felt it as if fate itself had grabbed them by the throat. Rocco stepped forward, letting the vapor of his breath blend with the mist the storm was lifting off the ground, and with a slow, almost ceremonial movement, he crouched until he was at the boy's height. His hand, large, rough, hardened by decades of road, fell on Mateo's shoulder with a gentleness that didn't match its size, as if he were touching something that might break with the slightest mishandling. When he spoke, his voice came out deep, torn, with that metallic tone that only forms after thousands of kilometers of asphalt and loss. Sometimes Santa doesn't come on a sleigh, but he still comes. Mateo blinked, confused, as if trying to understand whether what he'd just heard was a joke or a promise. But the bikers didn't laugh. They didn't make exaggerated gestures. They simply looked at him with an unexpected solemnity, as if the boy's question had touched a nerve none of them knew was still alive. Behind Rocco, the other men stood firm, unmoving, looking at the kid with a mix of respect and resolve. They needed no words, no meeting, no vote, no argument. These men had lived long enough, had buried enough friends, had survived enough brutal winters to recognize when something needed to be done. Something that didn't appear in any club rulebook, but belonged to a much older, more sacred code, protecting those who have no one. In that moment, without a single order given, without a leader raising his hand, the group made a silent, almost instinctive decision. They were going to show the boy that magic exists, even if it doesn't shine, even if it has no reindeer or golden bells. They were going to teach him that sometimes magic takes the shape of flesh and bone men who still remember what it means not to let someone fall into the dark alone. The air vibrated when the first man turned the key of his Harley. The engine roared like an old wolf waking from a deep sleep, and that sound, deep and round, echoed inside Mateo's chest. Then the second engine started, the third, and in a matter of seconds the entire street was filled with a chorus of motors that seemed to rouse the whole town from its stupor. Lights came on behind windows, curtains twitched. People wondered what on earth was happening out there. As the engines warmed, the bikers checked their bags, tightened straps, tested lights, exchanged brief glances heavy with meaning. They didn't smile. These weren't grins. They were agreements. Silent pacts that said, without words, "Tonight, whatever it takes, we do what's right." Rocco straightened up, adjusted his worn gloves, and, looking over his group beneath the heavy snowfall settling on their jackets, murmured with a firmness capable of cutting through the cold, "If we're going to do this, we're doing it right." The men nodded, and in that simple gesture, in that unanimous assent beneath the trembling lights of the storm, the legend of that night began. And if you believe loyalty still matters, subscribe to Hell's Road, because this brotherhood is only just beginning. The bikers lined up under the snowfall as if they were an army risen from the night itself. Dark and solid figures carved out by the trembling glow of the headlights. The snow fell silently over them, settling on their shoulders, on their helmets, on the patches sewn into their vests. Patches that weren't just symbols, but fabric scars. Stories of endless roads, fallen brothers, promises only understood by those who've lived too close to the asphalt and too far from comfort. Each vest shone with a sense of belonging that needed no explanation. They were like worn armor, full of memory and loyalty. And on that cold, merciless night, they looked like more than just a motorcycle club. They looked like guardians of a vow that wasn't written on any paper, but burned in each of their eyes with unshakable force. While the storm spat thick flakes that crashed against the dark leather, the men began to prepare without losing rhythm, moving with the silent coordination of those who have survived together. One checked a metal box. Another opened a backpack and pulled out small lights. Another laid out tools, cables, blankets, anything that might turn a night condemned to sadness into something Matteo would remember for the rest of his life. They didn't speak because there was no need. The plan was forming between them like an invisible current. Install light where there was none. Fix what was broken. Bring warmth where there had only been cold. Give the boy a moment of real magic, a night that would break the cruel cycle he had been trapped in since he was born. The group's hardened hands worked with speed and purpose. They tightened gloves, tested batteries, distributed wrapped bags, checked flashlights, pointed directions. They were small, almost mechanical movements, but behind each gesture burned the same powerful truth. Brotherhood doesn't need words. Brotherhood is proven. And in that moment, it was as if the road itself whispered a deeper truth, one these men carried carved into their skin. When someone small asks for help, a real man answers. They wore their colors like armor, symbols of loyalty stitched in leather and memory. You can carry that same spirit. Our official Hell's Road store is linked in the description for those who live by the code. The engines, one by one, began to roar with a deep, rising sound that seemed to shake the snow out of the air. It was as if the night itself recoiled before them. And when they were all running at the same time, the roar became a single powerful heartbeat, announcing that something big, something impossible, was about to begin. The convoy moved through the empty streets like a river of steel and fire, rolling slowly, almost ceremoniously, while the orange flashes of the headlights reflected off the never-ending snowfall, painting the air with a warm glow that clashed with the knife cold of the night. Neighbors, awoken by the deep growl of the engines, peered out from behind fogged curtains, unable to understand what kind of procession was crossing the heart of the town on such a hostile night. Some thought it was a bad omen, others some kind of strange ritual. No one knew the truth. No one could imagine that these giants of leather and metal hadn't come to bring fear, but to mend a wound winter had been reopening for far too long. When the bikes stopped in front of the boy's house, silence fell like a curtain. The building looked like a ghost, a dark, sad place, almost defeated by too many winters, with cracks opening like old scars and a sagging roof that let the wind slip through. There was no light, no warmth, no sign of life, only a silence heavier than the snow piled on the ground. And then the transformation began. One of the bikers stepped off his Harley with a portable lamp hanging from his backpack like a small sun. He walked up to the entrance and set it down on the ground, switching it on with a sure click. The warm glow lit up the battered door for the first time in years. Another approached the broken window and, without saying a word, placed a box wrapped in red paper there, carefully shielding it so the snow wouldn't soak it. His huge, tattooed hands touched the gift as if it contained something fragile. A third inspected the door. He lifted it, checked the hinges, pulled tools from a pocket, and in a matter of minutes had it rehung with the ease of someone who has learned to fix broken things because he himself once was. Meanwhile, another biker walked toward the dead tree in the yard, a dry trunk that hadn't seen a spark of life in seasons. He took out a battery, cables, and a handful of small lights. His thick fingers, which had gripped handlebars at over 100 kilometers per hour countless times, now worked with impossible delicacy. He connected one cable, then another, and suddenly the tree woke up. It was a silent, almost sacred explosion. A string of lights turned on at once, wrapping the dead tree in a warm, almost golden glow that slashed through the night's darkness like lightning. The shadows retreated. The house stopped looking like a ruin. For a brief moment, the whole winter seemed to hold its breath. And there, on the sidewalk, was Mateo. Small, trembling, eyes wide open like someone watching a miracle and still afraid to believe it. He covered his mouth with both hands, unable to contain the shaking rising from his chest. It was too much. It was everything. It was a night split in two. The life he had known and the life that was beginning in that very instant. Rocco walked toward him slowly, letting the crunch of snow under his boots announce his presence. He stopped in front of the boy, looking at him with that mix of hardness and tenderness that only men who have survived too many storms can carry, and placed a heavy gloved hand on his shoulder. When he spoke, his voice sounded deep, worn, like an old engine that still has one last ride left in its heart. Doesn't matter what they told you. He paused, letting the lights reflect in the boy's eyes. Magic is real, kid. And then, with a barely visible half-smile, it just changes shape. The house that just hours earlier had looked like a dying body, abandoned to the weather and to oblivion, now shone like an improbable beacon in the middle of winter. The lights the bikers had strung up flickered with an almost human warmth, pushing the darkness back to the edges of the yard, stripping the cold of its absolute rule. For the first time in a long time, that home looked like a place where a smile could be born, where a child could believe, even if only for one night, that the world still held a corner not built to hurt him. The door opened slowly, letting out a soft creak that was no longer one of defeat, but of surprise. Matteo's mother stepped onto the threshold with trembling hands, her eyes full of tears that rolled down her cheeks without her even trying to stop them. Her gaze swept the scene in disbelief. The lit tree, the repaired entrance, the warm lights, the gifts protected from the snow, and her son, standing under that glow, his eyes ignited by something life had denied him for far too long. She tried to speak, tried to ask who they were, why they had done all this, what debt they were about to claim from her. But nothing came out of her throat, because this had no logic. No explanation lead to redemption, others to memory. And if you want to keep the flame alive, the official Hell's Road store is linked in the description, where brotherhood lives beyond the story. The bikers, however, did not wait for words. They weren't looking for gratitude, or tears, or promises of change. What they had come to do was already done, and it needed no applause or witnesses. One by one, they made a small gesture, a slight nod, a silent salute, that serious, respectful bow offered only by men who act guided by a code older than themselves. Then they turned away, climbed onto their bikes, and fired up the engines. The roar filled the street like a deep thunder bidding farewell to the moment, vibrating between the houses and pushing away the remaining fear, as if with each rev they were carrying off a piece of the sadness they had found there. The lights of their Harleys moved toward the edge of town, cutting through the snowfall like embers that refused to die. And little by little, the sound faded into the distance, becoming a soft echo that merged with the night wind. Matteo watched them disappear, his heart pounding in his chest, knowing he would never forget that night. Some roads lead to redemption, others to memory. And if you want to keep the flame alive, the official Hell's Road store is linked in the description, where brotherhood lives beyond the story. Days went by, and every time Mateo heard the distant rumble of a Harley, he smiled without knowing why. He didn't wait for gifts anymore, nor for miracles. He had simply understood something that few adults ever really learn: that kindness can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the guardians of winter don't wear red suits. They wear black leather. The boy grew up with that night tattooed on his soul, knowing that somewhere out on the road, a group of giants kept riding, carrying with them undeniable proof that there is still light in the shadows. This was one of many forgotten legends of the road. And if you want to keep hearing stories that beat with truth and asphalt, subscribe to Hell's Road. The next one is closer than you think.